So today's daf is Lamed Gimel. And we're going to start at the top of Lamed Gimel where the two dots are, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines from the top. And we're continuing on with the same discussion that we had before in terms of what is the location of the eruv. And when we say the eruv, we mean this food that's being left to extend the techum. What is the location of it vis-a-vis the person who placed the eruv? In other words, is it accessible to him or not accessible to him? We're on Amud Aleph. You're on Amud Bet, so you might want to turn back a page the other direction. Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. So my Rabbi my Rabbanan. So we said that there's a machloket between Rabbeinu HaKadosh and the other rabbis with respect to the following question. During Ben HaShemashot, from the time that the sun sets until the stars come out, according to Rabbeinu HaKadosh, you are allowed to violate, or you're allowed to do things that are rabbinically prohibited on Shabbat. And that is actually what the accepted halacha is. You're allowed to do things that are rabbinically prohibited on Shabbat. According to the Chachamim, you are not allowed to, even during Ben HaShemashot, you are not allowed to do things that are rabbinically prohibited on Shabbat, even during that time. So according to Rabbeinu HaKadosh, they didn't impose the gezerot, rabbinic rules, until it was definitely Shabbat. So where do we see this? My Rabbi my Rabbanan. And the reason why this was significant was that according to Rabbeinu HaKadosh, according to Rabbi, if you put your eruv in a place that you wouldn't be able to take it on Shabbat, but the only reason you wouldn't be able to take it would be rabbinically, it's a rabbinic strict restriction, so then it would be okay, because during Ben HaShemashot, when the eruv takes effect, it's accessible to you because you're allowed to do things that are rabbinically prohibited. According to the rabbis, once the sun sets, you can't even do things that are rabbinically prohibited. So even if the eruv were in a place, like in a karmelit or something, in a place that it's rabbinically prohibited to carry from, you wouldn't be able to count that eruv because you would be in one place and the eruv is in another place. Okay, so that's the basis for this whole machloket. So Tanya is willing to write that Netano be'ilan lemala me'asarat tefachim en eruvo eruv lemata me'asarat tefachim eruvo eruv va'asur litelo. But he says that if you put the eruv more than 10 tefachim from the ground, so we're talking about you put it in a tree. So if it's more than 10 tefachim from the ground, that is, he says, en eruvo eruv. That is not a good eruv. It's not valid. Okay. Now, if it's less than 10 tefachim in height, eruv eruv, then it is a good eruv. Ve'asur litlo. But you're not allowed to take it. Why are you not allowed to take it on Shabbat? Because it's on a tree, and you're not allowed to take things to and from a tree on Shabbat, because we're concerned you're going to lean on the tree, and you're not allowed to utilize the tree on Shabbat. Betoch shelosha mutar litlo. And if it's within 3 tefachim of the ground, so then you can even take it off the tree, because anything within 3 tefachim of the ground is considered like it's resting on the ground anyway. So even if the tree had like a little knob or whatever that was sticking out, and you put your eruv on it, and it was within 3 tefachim of the ground, that's also going to be considered like it's resting on the ground. Nitano bekalkala, if you put it in a basket, utzala obailan, and you hung it on the tree, afilo lemala me'asarat tefachim eruvo eruv, even if you hang it more than 10 tefachim from the ground, it's a valid eruv. Divrei Rabbi. These are the words of Rabbi. So this is what Rabbeinu HaKadosh says. So normally he said that if it's above 10 tefachim it wouldn't be good, but if you hang it on a basket, then it's going to be okay. Now remember, what we talked about was when we explained the case, we explained it that you are sitting at the base of the tree. That's where you decided to make your Shabbat resting place. But the actual eruv is resting on a branch, and this branch is hanging far out, so it's not in your immediate, area. And if it's above 10 amot, so then it's considered. If it's above 10 tefachim, so then it's going to be considered out of your domain. Okay, it's no longer in your domain anymore, and you're not going to be able to reach it on Shabbat, and therefore you're not going to be able to consider that your eruv. If it's within 10 tefachim, you would be allowed to.
Hanging out,
look,
away from
your spot is over here by the base of the tree.
Okay.
It's over here.
Right.
Okay, or or however you want to envision the branch, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Okay. So, actually, one second. Okay. So, that's the basket. This shows the basket in illustration 165. It shows the basket that's above 10 tefachim.
Okay.
Now, but when it's on the branch, it's talking about a branch that's extending. Oh, this is the next case. That extends away from where you're actually going to be sitting here, but the food is over here.
You're going to be sitting there.
This is because you have to establish a spot that is your makom shavita, and then you have to put the food down.
I got you.
So where you put the food down has to be within reach or within access to the place that your makom shavita is. Okay? So if it's more than 10 tefachim high, that's out of your domain. That's going to be considered like it's in a Reshut Yachid.
This is 163 you're talking about.
Does it have one? No, that's the previous case.
And,
that's the previous case.
And your makom shvita has to be a limited amount of space. In other words, you can't
it's
take
only 4 amot square. Only 4 amot square. And if this branch juts out further than that, so then it's not within your 4 amot square. So it's going to be considered in its own Reshut Yachid, and there's a Reshut Rabim in between you and the Reshut Yachid, so it's no good. Okay, if it were directly above you, it would be okay because you'd be considered like you're in the same domain.
Information? What can't you? What
well, that was yesterday's daf because if it's right above you, then we look at you guys as being in the same place. You and the food are viewed as being in the same place, even though technically it's in a biblical Reshut Yachid and you're biblically in a Reshut Rabim.
Yeah.
Because that 4 amot is given to you halachically, and it's directly above you. It's considered to be in the same place as you are.
Oh.
Okay? Right. So that's why they had to add the factoid that, it's hanging far away.
Okay.
So, but anyway, if it's above 10, if it's below 10, now if it's hanging in a basket, even if it's above 10, it's going to be okay. So we're going to see why this is in a second. And the rabbis say, Kol makom shasur litilo en eruvo eruv. Anytime you put the eruv in a place where you cannot take it on Shabbat, it doesn't count. So the question is, ahaya, v'chachamim omrim ahaya. Which thing were the rabbis qualifying? Ile ma'asefa. Are they referring to the last case, the case of the basket? Does that mean that the rabbis are saying that even something hanging on the side of a tree you're not allowed to take? But that itself is a machloket in Masekhet Shabbat. So we can't assume the rabbis are expressing an opinion on that topic, okay? Because if they were expressing an opinion on the topic, then it wouldn't have been an argument in Masekhet Shabbat. So therefore, we must assume that they agree that if it's in a basket hanging on the side of the tree, then it doesn't matter. That's going to be okay because the hanging on the side of the tree, you're not considered to be, or it's doubtful whether you're considered to be handling the tree itself by taking to and from the basket. So that's not the argument here. The question is Ela Aresha. So rather, they are talking about the first case. Okay? Now Rashi explains. That Rabbi said that if you put it in the tree lower than 10 tefachim, it's a good eruv, but you can't take it from there. The rabbis say, so basically the issue is like this. If it's above 10 tefachim, we're considering it to be like it's in a Reshut Yachid. You're not in the same place, and therefore you cannot get your eruv. Biblically, on a biblical level, you can't get your eruv because it's in a private domain and you're in a public domain. But if it's lower than 10 tefachim, that means it's actually considered to be in the public domain also. And you're in the public domain, so no problem. The only problem is you can't take something off a tree.
From rabbinic.
Right, it's rabbinically prohibited. And so even though Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi would agree that on Shabbat itself, on Shabbat proper, you cannot take that item off the tree because you're using the tree and you're going to lean on the tree, still he allows the eruv to be valid because he says that's only a rabbinic prohibition. And when it really counts, which is right when the sun sets, you're allowed to violate rabbinic prohibitions anyway. The Chachamim say no, since it's rabbinically prohibited, even though it's only rabbinically prohibited to take the item off of the tree, we still enforce the rabbinic restriction even during Ben HaShemashot, even at that twilight period right after sunset, and therefore the eruv is not going to be valid because there's no point at which you could actually take the eruv and on Shabbat.
Even though you never really use it. I mean,
you don't really have to use it.
You have to use it,
but it has to be accessible to you.
So you're not leaning on the tree.
You have to be able to use it.
You have to be able, right?
And the potential is ruined if you're going to lean on the tree.
Because it's prohibited to take it,
right?
According to the Chachamim. So we see from there that's the argument there that Rabbi is saying you can't take it from the tree, but it's valid. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is saying and the Chachamim are saying that since you can't take it from the tree, then it's not bad. Okay. Now, what kind of tree are we talking about here? Does the branch that your food's resting on, in other words, does this tree have a width of 4 tefachim or not? We want to understand the dimensions of the tree, that you placed your food on this tree. What are the dimensions of it? If it has less than 4 tefachim, makom petur, that's considered an exempt area. Remember, we know that even if something is 10 tefachim high in the Reshut HaRabim, but it's very thin, okay, that's not considered a Reshut HaYachid. If you have a pillar that's 4 tefachim wide and reaches a height of 10 tefachim, it's considered like a private domain. It's considered like a Reshut HaYachid of its own. But here, what is the tree? If the tree is 10 tefachim high, and it has less than 4 tefachim, then it's called makom petur. It's called an exempt area. That's not even a Reshut HaYachid. You could take from it into a Reshut HaRabim according to everyone. So that wouldn't even be an issue. So and if it has 4 tefachim, then putting it in the basket, how's that going to help you? In other words, if it's 4 tefachim wide, the tree, and it's 10 tefachim high, we have to assume it's 10 tefachim high, then how does it being in a basket help you? It's a Reshut HaYachid, and you're placing your food on a Reshut HaYachid. So what difference does it make whether that Reshut HaYachid, where on the Reshut HaYachid you place it? In other words, you place it on a basket hanging on the Reshut HaYachid, but that's called Chorei Reshut HaYachid. That's an extension of the Reshut HaYachid. It doesn't matter that it's in a basket, so why is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi being lenient about the basket? The basket should be the same or worse, at least the same. Because this tree is itself 4 tefachim wide and 10 tefachim high.
But it's still a tree.
Right, but it's a private domain in its own right.
But you can't touch it.
True, but there are two different issues. One issue is the rabbinic issue of taking things off of the tree. The other issue is, if I were to take it, is it biblically prohibited for me to take it off the tree? Because I'm actually transferring from a private to a public domain. So when we erase that issue by saying that the tree is not really a private domain, it's really a makom petur, so then the only issue that remains is the rabbinic issue of taking things off of the tree. So that you can factor that out. But the Gemara is asking that if we were that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is making a distinction between where the object is on this tree, if it's hanging on a basket, if it's on the tree, if it's above 10 tefachim, if it's below 10 tefachim, and so on.
Which seems to be relevant.
Right, which seems to mean that there's some relevance to that, to the position, and whether it's a basket. So that seems to be relevant, in other words, in terms of defining whether it's a private domain or not. So if it's not a private domain, it shouldn't matter, and if it is a private domain, it also shouldn't matter that it's hanging from a basket. It should be just as bad. So the Gemara says, Amar Ravina says, Reshad it be'arba'a, Seifad let be'arba'a, Ve'kalkala mashlimatula arba'a. The issue is like this. In the first case, okay, the first case that Rabbi mentions, where he puts it either below 10 tefachim or above 10 tefachim. Okay, so in those cases, it has 4 tefachim of width. Okay, so therefore, if it's going to be above 10 tefachim, and there's 4 tefachim of width in the tree, that's why he's saying it can't be above 10 tefachim, because if it's above 10 tefachim, that area that's above 10 tefachim on the tree is a private domain. Okay, that area of the tree above 10 tefachim is a private domain, so it has to be below. But that's presuming that the tree must be 4 tefachim in width, otherwise it wouldn't be a private domain. However, in the latter case where he talks about the basket, that's talking about a thin tree. So even above 10 tefachim on that tree is not a private domain.
Rabbi Yehuda is talking about a thin tree.
Rabbeinu HaKadosh in the first case is talking about a fat tree. Okay. In the first case, he's talking about a fat tree. So that's why it matters whether the item is above 10 tefachim or below. Because if it's above, then it's a private domain. Because you have 10 tefachim in height and you have 4 tefachim in width. Below it, you don't have the 10 tefachim in height anymore. That's why it makes a difference. But if it's a thin tree, then even if it's 10 tefachim in height, it shouldn't matter. So what's the issue with the kalkala, with the basket? So in that case, the tree is thin, but kalkala mashlimatula arba'a. And the kalkala, the basket, completes 4 tefachim. So what that means is like this. Let's say the tree is 2 tefachim in width. Your basket is 2 tefachim in width. So the basket is hanging on the tree. So if you were to hollow out the tree, you would have 4 tefachim of surface area there. Okay, but you don't, right? In reality, you don't. Now, what Rabbeinu HaKadosh is saying is that in this case, we don't have a real Reshut HaYachid because the tree is only 2 tefachim in width. It's not 4 tefachim in width. So that's why in the second case with the basket, he said it doesn't matter if it's 10 tefachim up, if it's below 10 tefachim, it doesn't matter where it is. If it's on a basket, it's fine, because he's talking about a case where the tree is not thick enough for it to be a private domain.
You couldn't rest on the combination of the tree and the basket.
That's the point. That's what he's saying. Okay? Now, hold on. So, and this comes to another issue, which is going to be that according to Rabbeinu HaKadosh, you have another requirement of Eruv Techumin, which is it has to be resting on what's called a Makom Dalet. It has to be resting on a significant place, which is a place of 4 tefachim. Okay? So when Rabbeinu HaKadosh brings in the case of the kalkala, of the basket, he's not actually trying to illustrate something about private and public domain, because he's actually dealing with a case where it isn't a private domain, because the tree is too thin. He's just dealing with the basket. He's dealing with the question of, is having your Eruve Techumin in a basket that's very small still considered resting it in a significant place? Can we combine the surface area of the tree? So, for example, if we were to look at the tziur, if we look at the drawing that they have in the back, it shows us how this is envisioned. So, so you see that the food is, this is the basket. Okay, now the tree is less than 4 tefachim. This is illustration number 166. So it's in the basket. The basket is less than 2 tefachim. The tree is less than 2 tefachim. So he's not dealing with whether that's resting in a private domain. He'll tell you that's not a private domain. The tree is too thin for it to be a private domain. But it is resting on a makom daled. The food is resting on an area of 4 tefachim, because we imagine the tree as if it's hollow. We imagine the tree as if it's hollow. Okay?
Wait, what is hollow?
What? Yeah.
Because it's next to a solid object. How could you count that a surface area of a flat? You need the food to be resting on a flat surface of 4 tefachim. So this is only 2 tefachim. The tree is not a flat surface. The tree is a solid thing. Like, watch. Am I resting this recorder on my cup?
No.
Why not? Because it's next to it. This is a wall.
Right.
Am I now?
Yes.
Okay, because it's the top of it, right? So the point is, if I took, let's say I took like this is the basket. Okay? There's the basket. Now am I resting my recorder on the siddur?
Yes.
Okay, is it resting on the cup?
No.
But Rabbi Yehuda Nasi will say to you that, you know what, I'm going to imagine as if this wall is not really here of the cup, and it's resting on there too.
Well, what's this
hollow, right?
Hollowing it out, meaning you're cutting through the wall. As if you hollow out the side of the wall, a notch in the wall.
Hollow mean on the side.
On the side, not
I had the same confusion.
Yeah, through the side.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then he is combining.
He's combining it just for, So now the Gemara is going to come back and say, well, once you combine, why isn't it a Reshut HaYachid? Right? Because now you're giving him 4 tefachim.
Right.
So it's going to come back and discuss that issue. Yeah.
Why doesn't Reshut HaYachid need an ownership?
Well, that's one of the problems. That's one of the reasons why the rabbis created the idea of Eruvei Chatzerot is because of that confusion. Because most of the time people think that a Reshut HaYachid is defined by the owners. So that's why they made Eruvei Chatzerot, that if there are multiple owners, we're going to consider it like a public domain, because that's what most people think.
Something's ownerless.
But really, if it's enclosed, technically, biblically speaking, that's a Reshut HaYachid. It doesn't matter. Even a city could be a Reshut HaYachid if it has walls.
So an ownerless enclosed area is...
Doesn't matter. Now they made certain rabbinic rules about that. Well, it has to be mukaf l'dirah, it has to be enclosed for a living, it can't be multiple owners using it will be a problem, but that's all rabbinic. Biblically...
Wait, how are they being more lenient than the rabbinic?
They're being more stringent by saying that even though the courtyard that is owned by multiple people is really a Reshut HaYachid, and therefore you could carry in there, the rabbi said you can't, without an Eruvei Chatzerot.
But they're also being more lenient. Why? Because then you could carry in and out of it.
Only from your house. But you could do that anyway.
If the rabbis are saying it's a Reshut HaRabim when biblically it'd be Reshut HaYachid, then they're being more stringent for carrying inside, but they're being more lenient for carrying to and from the area.
No, because you can't carry from outside into the Chatzer. You can't. No, you wouldn't be able to.
Okay.
Yes.
What you just said, is it biblically the case that a walled city
is a Reshut HaYachid?
Yeah.
like Yericho is a Reshut Yachid. Yerushalayim, the old Yerushalayim is a Reshut Yachid. If it has doors, if it has gates, then it's a Reshut Yachid.
So then the only carrying restrictions are rabbinic. The carrying, it's all rabbinic.
In a place like that.
Like that, yeah.
In a place like that, yeah. So that's the case. It says Yershe.
Yeah, I'm just making up. I didn't.
What? Yeah, but in a place that has no walls, it's biblical. But in a place that has walls, like Yerushalayim has walls, if it had a complete wall and there's only gates opening, so it would only be rabbinic. Okay, so so there are two issues here. One is whether it's a Reshut Yachid, and then we're saying no, it isn't, because this is a thin tree. In the first case, where it mattered, where the height mattered, so then we were talking about a real Reshut Yachid where the tree was thick. But now we're talking about a thin tree where the basket combined, if we were to flatten the tree, if we were to cut through the tree, slice through it, it would give us a surface area of 4 tefachim. But we don't have a surface area of 4 tefachim. So, and we turn to Amud Bet, Rabbi Savar like Rabbi Meir, Savar like Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi is combining the opinions of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda here. How so? Savar like Rabbi Meir, Damar Chokikin Lashlim, Savar like Rabbi Yehuda, Damar Bainan Eruv Gabe Makom Arba'a Veleka. That you have two issues here. Number one is a principle called Chokikin Lashlim. Chokikin Lashlim is something that we've come across before. In the case of Mezuzah, remember we had the situation where the doorway is it curves around. It's a kippah. It's called the kippah, so it curves around. Instead of being square, 2 side posts and a cross beam on top, it's semicircular. In other words, it's oval shaped on top. So because it's oval shaped on top, it doesn't have the dimensions on top that it's supposed to have, a 4 tefachim, to qualify as a doorway. It only has that on the bottom, but as it reaches the top, it starts to curve around and become circular. So Rabbi Meir says, Chokekin lashlim. We imagine as if you could slice out of that doorway a totally square doorway, rectangular doorway, then it's fine. According to the Chachamim, no, we just look at what we have, and since it thins out within a certain height of the ground, within a certain distance from the ground, it already starts to narrow. We don't say, well, since we could slice it out and make a doorway, we count it as a doorway. We don't say that.
The same discussion with the Mavoi, with the gate of the Mavoi.
Right, we had the same discussion. We brought this in before. This is a classic case. So Rabbi Meir says Chokekin Lashlim. Rabbi is saying Chokekin Lashlim. He's saying since the basket is only 2 tefachim and we need the food to be resting on 4 tefachim, so we imagine as if we sliced through the tree and we made 4 tefachim of surface area. And he holds like Rabbi Yehuda that you need eruv al gabei makom arba'a veleka, that you need a space of 4 tefachim, and you don't have it unless, of course, you slice through the tree. So that's why. In other words, the reason why he needs you to in an imaginary way slice through the tree is because he needs to create the 4 tefach surface area. So the reason why he holds the 4 tefach surface area is he's holding like Rabbi Yehuda. He holds that you can use your imagination to slice through the tree because he's holding like Rabbi Meir. So my Rabbi Yehuda, where do you get the idea that Rabbi Yehuda maintains that you need 4 tefachim of surface area? Because the Tanya learned in a brighter Rabbi Yehuda Omer Na'atz Korah B'Rshut Rabim V'Iniach Eruvo Alea Gavoa Yod Urchava Dalet Eruvo Eruv V'Im Lav In Eruvo Eruv. It says that if you put a stick in the Reshut Rabim and you placed your eruv around, you placed your eruv on it, and the eruv here again is talking about the food itself. You placed it on the stick. If the stick is 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide, it's good. If not, it's not good. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Adarabba, it's on the contrary. If you have a case where it's 4 tefachim wide and 10 tefachim tall, it's worse, not better. Because if you're in the Reshut Rabim and you now have something that's on a stick that's 4 by 10, so 10 tefachim in height and 4 in width, so then it's in a different Reshut. It's in a Reshut Yachid and you're in the Reshut Rabim. If it's thinner than that, if it's 10 tefachim high and it's less than 4 tefachim wide, so then we would say that's even better. Or if it's shorter than 10 tefachim, it's even better because it's in your domain. It's definitely in your domain then. So the Gemara answers, Elahachi Kamar, this is what it meant. Gavoa asar tzarich shei b'rosh arba'a. And gavoa asar ein tzarich shei b'rosh arba'a. What he meant was, if it's 10 tefachim tall, then it has to have 4 tefachim in width for it to be counted. Why? Because your eruv has to rest on a place that is a significant place. But if the stick is less than 10 tefachim, it's within 10 tefachim of the ground, then we consider it to be resting on the ground. Because the airspace of the Reshut Harabim extends up to 10 Tefachim. So anything within the airspace of the Reshut Harabim is going to be considered like it's resting on the ground anyway. But if it's above 10 Tefachim, now in order to be considered resting on a significant place, you need 4 Tefachim of space.
Significant is defined as 4 Tefachim or more?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how they're defining it. So that means that that's what you're going to need. Okay, so let me just see if Rashi says anything here. So right, okay, so that's it. So therefore the Gemara is correcting it to say that if it's less than 10 tefachim in height, it doesn't need to be 4 tefachim wide. If it's more than 10 tefachim in height, then it needs to be 4 tefachim wide. And that's what it meant. It didn't mean that it has to be 10 tefachim tall and 4 tefachim wide. It's not necessary for it to be that way. It could be lower. It's just a question of when do you need the 4 tefach requirement in terms of width.
For that, if the skinny tree, or the pole, or the skinny, whatever, if the basket was on top of it,
right.
Or on a
That's the next case. That's the next case. Yeah, so let's see that. So Kiman, who is our case going like? Dilak Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. It's not like Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya because it says in the Braita, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Na'atz kana b'reshut harabim, ve'niach b'roshot raskal, ve'zarak v'nachal gabav chayav. That if you put a stick in the middle of the Reshut Harabim, and you placed a basket on top of the stick, and you threw something and it landed in the basket, chayav. Why? Why are you chayav? Because you threw from a public domain into a private domain. You created a private domain because the stick was 10 tefachim tall. Your basket was 4 tefachim wide. Basically, it creates a Reshut HaYachid.
What if it's a 2 tefach basket?
Then it wouldn't create a Reshut HaYachid. It has to have at least 4 tefachim. But what do you see from that? That if you have 4 tefachim, what do you have? A Reshut HaYachid. So too in our case. Now we come back to our case, that if Rabbeinu HaKadosh is saying you can have this basket next to the tree and we combine the surface area of the basket with the tree, then what are you really getting? 4 tefachim. And it's 10 tefachim tall, so what do you really have? A Reshut HaYachid. And that means that your actual food is in a Reshut HaYachid and you are in a Reshut Harabim. Problem, right? So, what are we going to say? Afilu tema Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda hatam hadran mechitzta, acha lo hadran mechitzta. There's a big difference because over by Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda's case, you have the basket. The basket's mechitzot are enclosing an area of 4 tefachim under them. Right? Because they're on the. If you look, the basket is sitting on a pole, and the basket is 4 tefachim, and so it's actually hovering over a space of 4 tefachim. So if we were to imagine the walls of this basket going down, it's like a roof extending down. It's like walls extending down. But when it comes to the basket, okay, what's underneath the basket is only 2 tefachim of space. It's only hovering over 2 tefachim of space. You want to add the 2 tefachim of the thickness of the tree, of the surface area of the tree, in order to give your eruv an extra 2 tefachim. But you can't say that your basket is really hovering over 4 tefachim of space. It's not. It's only hovering over 2 tefachim of space. And so therefore we're not going to say that. And Rashi says, we're not going to combine. In other words, Rashi says, we're not going to say both of these imaginary things that we imagine as if we're slicing through the tree and giving ourselves an extra 2 tefachim of space. And we're going to imagine as if the walls are then coming down and making a Reshut HaYachid. That's too much imagining. Okay, even we're not going to do that. Even as legally creative as we can be, we're not going to imagine that far. And so therefore, you're not going to have the problem of Reshut HaYachid. You get the benefit of the tree giving you the extra 2 tefachim of surface area, but you don't have the liability of it creating a Reshut HaYachid, in essence. Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Shani Kalkala, I'll tell you why. Forget about all this stuff about Chokakin L'Hashlim and the saying that he requires 4 tefachim of surface area and all this. Forget about it. You know why it is that the basket is different than if it's above 10 tefachim, it's still good? Even though normally it wouldn't be good? Because normally we would be dealing, let's say, with a basket that is 4 tefachim wide. Why is it good in this case and normally it's not good? The answer is because because you can tilt the basket. So even though it might be hanging above 10 tefachim, the fact is you could tilt the basket and the object and extract the object at a height lower than 10 tefachim. So even though the basket itself might be above 10 tefachim, since it's mobile and it could be tilted and you could extract it at 9 tefachim, then you're good.
So the tilt is considered...
The tilt is considered like it's not really... And so they show us a picture of this also. There's a tziyur. And we're not even saying you really have to do that. He's just saying since it has the potential of being tilted, say you could tilt it in potential as number 168 shows you. So since tilting is a possibility that you could shake it out, therefore it's considered to be within the 10 tefachim, even when it's above 10 tefachim. Yativ Rav Papa was sitting and he said over this teaching, Rav Bar Shiva objected to Rav Papa and said, what can he do? Now this is talking about a case where a person wants to make an Eruvei Techumin for 2 days. It's a Yom Tov is Friday, and you want to make an Eruvei Techumin for 2 days. You want to make an Eruvei Techumin both for Friday, for Yom Tov, and also for Shabbat. So what can you do? Molicho berishon. So on Thursday you go umachshich alav, and you sit at the actual spot of the Techum that you want it to be until Thursday, until Yom Tov comes in on Thursday night. Then you walk back, vinot lo balo, and you go home with your Eruvei Techumin. And then basheni, the next day on Friday, what do? Machshich alav, you go back to the spot on Friday. Va'ochlo ubalo, and this time you have to eat the Eruvei Techumin in your spot and come home. Why? Because it's Friday, so it's going to be Shabbat. You can't carry it home. Now, it doesn't mean that you actually have to eat it there. What it means is you can't bring it home with you. So on Thursday, when you went to set up an Eruv for Yom Tov, because this is the case where Yom Tov is Friday, Shabbat, right? It's Friday. So you went on Thursday to make the Eruvei Techumin, but you sat there until Yom Tov started, and then you can actually take the bread home with you.
Because you worry
because it's Yom Tov.
Eat it or something?
Huh?
Why are you taking it home? You worry the animals are going to get it? Why do you have to take
I guess you...
Why can't you just leave it there for the 2 days?
Well, I guess in theory you could. Maybe you're worried you don't want to leave it there. Okay. It could be, yeah. It doesn't say exactly why you need to bring it home with you, but you're allowed to bring it home with you.
But it's not that you have to.
Yeah, he says maybe it's going to be lost and you won't have one for Friday for Shabbat. That's basically the reason. It could get lost and then you're not going to have an Eruv to use for Shabbat. So you want to protect it. You don't have to, right? So then you bring it home, but on Shabbat you can't bring it home, right? So Amai. So Lav Medalad Amud Aleph. Why is this name Makevan di Ibayam Tuye Mate Mimatele? Why don't we say like this? Why did they require you even on Thursday to take the Eruv over there? Say, since I could take it there, it's as if I took it there. Since you're using since, you're telling me, since I could tilt the basket, it's like it's below 10 tefachim, even though I'm not really tilting it. So tell me, well, since I could carry the Eruv over there, why do I have to bother doing it? Since is good enough, right?
Cool.
So Rashi says, why did the rabbis require you to take it over there? So we're going to see what's the answer. He answers that the reason is, Rabbi Zera says, and Rashi explains, that the only reason the rabbis actually physically required you to go to the spot of Eruvei Techumin, instead of just declaring it and saying, I want that to be my spot, and since I could bring it there, it's enough. Why did they actually require you to physically bring the food there? It says because of when Yom Tov follows Shabbat. The ba'el amtuye b'Shabbat le'arev leyom ha'machorat lo mateh mimatele v'tzarich lo licho me'erev Shabbat. Because if the person wanted to make an eruv, let's say Yom Tov falls out on Sunday, and let's say the person said on Friday, since I could bring it to the location, I don't need to bring it. Right? And then he wants his Eruv also to work for Sunday, for the Yom Tov. Now, could he bring it on Shabbat afternoon? No. So he's going to say, I didn't need to bring it because I could bring it. In other words, if people don't actually physically bring the Eruv, they're going to assume that it just automatically works without bringing it. They're not going to realize that it only works when you could have brought it. So on Yom Tov, it's true, you could have brought it. On Friday afternoon, you could have brought it. But on Shabbat, that's followed by a Yom Tov, you couldn't have brought it. And you're going to think, it automatically works even from the comfort of my own home to say that my Eruvei Techumin is at such and such spot. But that would only work on any other day, but not on a Shabbat afternoon, because on a Shabbat afternoon you couldn't actually do it. You would actually have had to put your Eruv there on Friday for the entire 2 days. Right, for Friday, for the whole 2 days.
For even Shabbat and Yom Tov.
Between Shabbat and Yom Tov? No, because you still wouldn't be able to, because it's from a Reshut HaYachid to Reshut HaRabim. It's still not going to be allowed to do it.
So an Eruv isn't good for 2 days.
No, it would be. It could be.
Then
but,
why not? Why not bring it Erev Shabbat and it's...
You could leave it there. You could have left it there. You could have left it there, but then it has to, in other words, let's say you left it there.
Let's say, I imagine that I brought it there. I could have brought it there on Erev Shabbat, and it could have stayed there through Sunday.
Oh, you mean why couldn't you have said that?
Unless there's something about the 2 days.
Well, I see what you mean. So in a case like, let's say I went on Thursday, and it's a 2-day Yom Tov, and I deposited the Eruv there. So in theory, if it stayed there, that could also be good for Shabbat, for Friday, right? So in this case, it's on Friday, I didn't do anything, because I said, well, I could have brought it, so it's good enough as if I were there. But then on Shabbat afternoon, when the question is, well, where's your Eruv? You can't say, well, I could have brought it on Shabbat, so it's going to count for my Yom Tov.
Span of the time.
It's not there because I didn't actually do it.
It's there,
right? It was only there in my mind. So there in my mind works when I actually could have brought it there, but there in my mind doesn't work when I couldn't have actually brought it there. So in that case, on Friday, I would have had, if I had actually physically brought the Eruv to the spot on Friday, so then it would count for both days because it's actually physically there. But if I relied on Friday on the fact that I could have brought it, but then on Shabbat evening I can't rely, on Shabbat afternoon I can't say, well, I could have brought it. So it's not going to work for the second day that I could have brought it because it's not physically there. And mentally I can't say, well, I could have brought it because I couldn't have brought it. So therefore the rabbi said you always have to put your Eruv at the location where it belongs.